I have had the pleasure of knowing Ambassador Sapiro since the early Clinton administration, when she was working at the State Department and then at the NSC on Southeastern European issues, including a critical role in the settlement of the Balkans war, and working on the economic reconstruction and reintegration of that important region into the rest of Europe. In the intervening time, she ran a very successful consulting firm. We occasionally collaborated on matters in our private capacities, and she moonlighted, as have I from time to time, on political activities, including a great deal of work for a then unknown candidate named Barack Obama. And we see here that she has brought that close relationship with this president, and that close relationship has brought her to this position as the Deputy U.S. Trade Representative. It was just last week that the Colombia and the United States came to a publicly announced framework on how they can move forward with the Colombia FTA. Until that point, Miriam and her colleagues at the U.S. Trade Representative's office were really constrained. They were not able to talk about what was going on, and we're delighted that to give her an opportunity just days after the announcement for her to come and actually talk about what she's been doing rather than just having to hide from questions. Before I ask her to come up here, I'd like to recognize Ambassador of Panama, Mario Jaramillo, who is here, and also the Ambassador of Guatemala, Francisco Villagian. Thank you very much for coming and gracing these proceedings with your presence. With that, let me turn it over now to Miriam Sapiro.
Thank you, Nelson, for that very kind introduction. Nelson and I have indeed known each other for a very long time. In fact, I think the year we met is now officially classified. I'm also very happy to see Simon and want to thank everyone at NDN and the New Policy Institute for inviting me to join you here today. I'm extremely pleased that the agreement that Congress reached just before midnight on Friday night has not only kept the government running, but enabled me to be here with all of you today. Let's take a quick look at what we've accomplished already before we look ahead to the next several months and years. Our trading relationship with Latin America has increased dramatically. We're now exporting 3 times as much to the region as we do to China. And our exports to the South are growing faster than our exports to the rest of the world. I think those are very impressive numbers that we should all be very, very proud of. Let me highlight quickly just a few of our successes over the last year so that you can see how they've laid the groundwork for what we've done in the last few weeks and what we hope to do in the months ahead. It was last spring when Antonio Patriota, Brazil's now foreign minister, and I negotiated a framework agreement that averted Brazil's imposition of approximately $800 million in retaliatory countermeasures on U.S. goods and, for the first time, intellectual property rights. This agreement put us on a very important path forward towards resolving the cotton dispute, which the WTO had decided in Brazil's favor. We're working now with Congress to try and resolve the underlying dispute as it looks towards the 2012 Farm Bill. In the meantime, this agreement that we negotiated has removed a very important bilateral irritant from our relationship. We use that momentum to then build an even stronger bilateral partnership. And last month, in conjunction with President Obama's visit to Latin America, we signed a landmark agreement on trade and economic cooperation. We call it an ATEC, and I think in Portuguese it's a TICA. Sounds a little better, but it's the same agreement, and we're both very proud of it. We've created a new high-level dialogue that deepens our cooperation on a range of issues, including intellectual property rights, including trade facilitation, and including reducing technical barriers to trade, which, as you know, can sometimes be even more challenging to address than the tariff barriers. On the same trip to Latin America and Central America, President Obama visited Chile, and there he and President Pinera acknowledged the remarkable expansion of our bilateral trade relationship since we signed an FTA with that country and it entered into force in 2004. Two-way trade between the U.S. and Chile has increased nearly 300% to almost $18 billion today. Further strengthening our economic cooperation, the presidents reaffirmed their commitment to full implementation of the FTA, including achieving significant progress on intellectual property rights this year that will enable our businesses to innovate and to stay competitive. The president also visited El Salvador, a country where the benefits of regional integration are quite clear. The previous month, we held our first ministerial meeting under the CAFTA agreement. We endorsed a positive, forward-looking agenda that focused in particular on trade facilitation and on what we can do to help our small and medium enterprises, our SMEs, and how we can broaden the benefits of trade to rapidly growing middle classes in all of the CAFTA countries. I took the opportunity to visit a new Hanes factory that was very impressive and would never, ever have been built without the certainty that CAFTA provided that company and its investors. I also took the time to meet with businessmen and farmers and talk about how they are benefiting from our new partnership and what more we can do as the United States and as the CAFTA partners to make sure that these benefits are spread more broadly. We've also spent significant time fostering the closest possible trade partnership between the U.S. and Mexico. Last May, we announced a new high-level regulatory cooperation council that will help to streamline the regulatory processes on both sides of the border that can otherwise slow and hinder exports. And more recently, President Obama and President Calderon announced a very important path forward to resolving the decades-old cross-border trucking dispute. I'm very pleased to say that our concept will establish a reciprocal, phased-in process and program built on the highest safety standards. Just last Friday, the Department of Transportation, under Secretary LaHood's leadership, announced that it had posted the terms of the proposed agreement for public comment. Mexico will suspend half of the retaliatory tariffs that it has placed on more than $2 billion of U.S. goods once the agreement is signed. And it will lift the remainder of these tariffs once the first carrier is granted operating authority. Mexico has also been a key partner in our ongoing efforts to strengthen global intellectual property rights. Last fall, with Mexico and other partner countries representing more than half of global trade, we finalized the text of the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, known as ACTA, during intense negotiations in Tokyo, and by that process created a very important new tool to fight counterfeiting and piracy. But we didn't want to stop there. Has anyone heard about our recent progress on the Colombia FTA? Anyone? I just want to make sure you'd heard, because it's very important news. And it would be hard to be in this town, or really any town across the country or across Colombia, and not have seen the headlines last Wednesday and Thursday. Colombia is the third largest economy in South America and one of our most important strategic partners in the region. Last year, our goods exports to Colombia were $12 billion. And the ITC, the International Trade Commission, estimates the passage of the FTA will expand these exports by more than $1 billion and increase U.S. GDP by more than $2.5 billion. I know Nelson was worried that I was going to not mention Colombia when I was speaking, but I want to reassure you, I wouldn't do that. Earlier this year, as many of you know, President Obama directed us to intensify our engagement with Colombia with the objective of trying to resolve the outstanding issues relating to the trade agreement this year. The president made clear that Colombia had to address very serious labor issues before he would be willing to move the agreement forward to Congress. I'm pleased to say that we had a series of intense discussions over the course of several weeks, and for the most part out of the headlines, because we felt that was the most efficacious and effective way of trying to address what were definitely sensitive and complex issues. And we succeeded at the end of the process of our discussions with Colombia in securing important, very important commitments on labor rights, on violence, and on impunity from prosecution that address the concerns that the President had described. The action plan related to labor rights that we produced was developed, as I said, really as a team effort with the U.S. and Colombia working in close partnership, and then approved by President Obama and President Santos when they met on Thursday. This action plan significantly expands the protection of labor leaders and organizers. It bolsters efforts to punish those who perpetrate violence against such persons, and it strengthens labor laws and their enforcement. It contains very specific, detailed actions that Colombia will take to advance each of these three goals. Some of these actions will be taken before we move the FTA forward, in fact, as soon as April 22nd, while others will be taken before Congress votes on the agreement or before entry into force. If you have not yet looked at the action plan and read it, I urge you to take the opportunity to do so. You will see that under the plan, the Colombian government has committed to enact labor reforms to prevent and penalize the abuse of cooperatives as a way for companies to keep workers from becoming official employees and enjoying labor rights. You will see that Colombia will hire 480 new labor inspectors, which doubles the number they currently have. Also, they will establish an anonymous complaint hotline and focus enforcement initiatives on the most vulnerable sectors. Colombia will also amend the criminal code to criminalize anti-union threats and discrimination. It will increase resources, it will expand training, and it will improve procedures to secure more effective prosecution of labor violence cases. It will also broaden access to protection programs for labor leaders and organizers under the threat of violence. At each step, we will work closely with the government on implementation and to jointly assess progress. It's important to note, as I mentioned earlier, that these initiatives have been proposed by the Santos administration, which has been a very willing partner in developing the action plan. President Santos and Vice President Garzón, himself a former labor leader, have already taken several important steps to address the labor problems that exist and to engage directly with the labor unions. The action plan fits well with President Santos's larger agenda and efforts to promote social justice in Colombia. These efforts include unprecedented land restitution for internally displaced victims of violence, as well as draft legislation to provide billions of dollars in reparations to victims of violence, including victims of state-sponsored violence. President Santos has also introduced legislation to create separate labor, justice, and environment ministries, and he has proposed dismantling the domestic security agency that has been implicated in human rights abuses. And the administration continues to engage constructively with Colombia not only on labor issues, but also on broader human rights issues as part of the high-level partnership dialogue. Moving forward on the U.S.-Colombia FTA is important now that our concerns are being addressed in a way that is both consistent with our values as Americans and that levels the playing field for American workers. Reducing barriers to our exports creates new opportunities for our businesses, our workers, our farmers, our ranchers, and others to have more and better paying jobs here at home. Let me say a few words about Panama, which I understand was the subject of Nelson's first question this morning, so I'm going to preempt him by saying a few words. I'm expecting more good news ahead with respect to Panama. We also intensified our efforts to work with that government to resolve the outstanding issues related to that FTA. Panama, as many of you know, is one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America or Central America, expanding by 3% in 2009, despite the global recession, and by over 6% in 2010. Panama is now in the process of completing work on the last step necessary for us to ready that agreement for congressional consideration. I'm pleased that Panama has already approved legislation to ensure that labor rights are respected in export processing zones and to eliminate restrictions on collective bargaining in companies less than 2 years old. Panama has also passed important legislation to ensure that companies in the Baru Special Economic Zone will no longer be exempt from key labor rights provisions. In addition, Panama has been striving to improve its tax transparency practices and signed a tax information agreement known as a T.P.A. with the United States last November that is in accordance with the internationally agreed standards as established by the OECD. We expect the National Assembly will be ratifying this agreement shortly. Moving forward, I believe that both FTAs will help us achieve the President's goal of doubling U.S. exports by the end of 2014 by opening these markets to products that are made and grown in America. These agreements will help U.S. exporters stay competitive as Colombia, Panama, and Korea, let us not forget the third FTA, Korea, as these partners enter into trade agreements with the European Union, with Canada, and with other partners. We must stay competitive. The exact timing of moving these 3 FTAs ahead is part of a broader discussion now with congressional leadership on how to sequence our overall trade agenda this year. This agenda includes a long-term extension of the Expanded Trade Adjustment Assistance Program known as T.P.A. It also includes renewal of the Generalized System of Preferences Program, GSP, and the Andean Trade Preference Act, ATPA, as well as establishing permanent normal trade relations with Russia as it becomes a member of the WTO. Korea is ready to move now, as we have said, and the ball is in Panama's court with respect to the steps that I mentioned, and that government is making very good progress. The Colombia agreement could be ready in a matter of weeks, but we will not leave the other important pieces of our trade agenda behind. Thank you again for inviting me here to speak, and I look forward to any questions.
Let me ask the first question. You mentioned the ATPA, and we can look back on the Andean Trade Preferences Act as, frankly, one of the great success stories of U.S. policy toward the region. Andean countries to begin lowering their trade barriers by the good example of our lowering our trade barriers, with the goal of trying to really lock in lower trade barriers and freer trade between our regions. And since then, since it started, we have Peru has now signed an FTA. Colombia will be joining an FTA. Bolivia and Venezuela have regretfully, by their own actions, decided not to participate in the benefits of the ATPA. And so now we're left only with one country, Ecuador, which last week expelled our ambassador. Does this put, will we declare ATPA a success and bring it to a close soon? Or do you see a future going forward, given that there's really only one country left who might benefit from the ATPA?
Well, Nelson, we were quite concerned that both ATPA and GSP have lapsed, and we've been working very hard to try to have both programs reestablished as soon as possible. The immediate concern that I have with the lapse in ATPA is that Colombia, since the middle of February, has been unable to take advantage of these preferences, and it's affecting many sectors of the Colombia business community. It's affecting workers. It's also having an impact on companies and workers in our country who depend on these imports coming in from Colombia so that they can be manufactured or otherwise used in our exports. So it's important to renew it for Colombia's competitiveness and also for our competitiveness. And we'd like to do that as soon as possible. Colombia has, of course, the FTA that we look forward to moving ahead quickly, but FTAs can take a while sometimes to be fully implemented. We've seen that with respect to a number of other countries, and it's very difficult to predict whether it will be a swift implementation process or whether it will take longer. So in any case, we want to see AT.P.A. renewed as soon as possible for as long as possible.
Let's turn now to the audience. We'll start with this gentleman here. Please come up to the microphone and let us know who you are and who you represent.
Hi, yes. My name is Matt Schul. I'm from Inside U.S. Trade. My question for Ambassador Sapiro is on enforcement of the Labor Action Plan. Ambassador Kirk said that some of the commitments under the action plan would be enforceable under the FTA. Could you explain how that would work and whether that would involve changing the FTA text itself or perhaps the implementing bill for the FTA? And which specific commitments in the action plan would be subject to enforcement? Thank you.
Matt,
Yes.
have you had a chance to look at the action plan?
Yes.
And also the FTA labor chapter?
Well, I understand that the labor chapter allows it allows the enforcement of the some of the 1996 ILO convention. Is that how you plan to connect those two, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Good. I would urge everyone, as I said, if you have a chance to look at the action plan and also look at the FTA labor chapter, which is very significant. It reflects what we call the May 10th, 2007 commitments, which was a bipartisan agreement reached then and implemented in the Peru FTA, also in the Panama FTA, and in the Colombia one as well. So thank you very much, Matt, for that question, because I do worry that it's a source of confusion out there, so anything I can do to help clarify it, I am happy to do. Ambassador Kirk said it exactly as you stated. There are extremely important labor provisions in the FTA. For example, there is a right to collective bargaining, there is a right to freedom of association, and other fundamental labor rights as recognized by the ILO. Those rights in the FTA are fully enforceable, just as commercial rights are. And as I said, this is a very important development to advance labor rights in not only this FTA, but in other FTAs as well. The action plan related to labor rights that we negotiated and concluded last week has a number of very important commitments in it that the government of Colombia is making. Some of those commitments are similar to or fall within the scope of the labor chapter of the FTA, while others do not go beyond the FTA. So the question that you're asking essentially would depend on the specifics of the particular issue and would have to be examined in terms of whether or not it fell within the confines of the FTA.
Good.
Do you anticipate changing the text of the FTA or the implementing bill? Sorry.
There is no need to change the text of the FTA.
Yeah. This gentleman over here, and then perhaps we can go to this side of the room over there.
Steve Landy, Manchester Trade. I'm part of the history of USTR. I was the first assistant USTR back in Ambassador Strauss Day, and I'm sorry I haven't seen you before, but it was great hearing that review in terms we all could understand. The Obama administration deserves much more credit that sometimes perhaps inside U.S. trade gives it in the terms of turning around the debate, and you really have opened it up to small business employment labor, so we congratulate you. Every administration, however, must first finish a lot of business left over, and you guys certainly have done it, as you explained in your particular speech. But you also have to have some new initiatives. And the question I really have is, has thought been given perhaps to entering into some type of an FTA or some type of a deeper agreement with Brazil or with the Mercosur countries and so on, because they really are still the largest countries in the region. And I know we have good relations, but I'd like to meet my European friends and say, hey, we have made a deal like France and Germany, US and Brazil. And I think also while we're focusing on the TPP, I can't give Brazil a Pacific coast, unfortunately. So since they can't be part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is there any ideas that people are thinking about for a good relationship, for a deeper agreement with Mercosur? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your kind words. We'll take compliments wherever we find them. And if there's something we can do better, let us know as well. We're very open to making sure that we're doing the best to serve all of our workers and farmers, ranchers, and companies. I can't tell you how important the work that we do is, in our view, to playing a small part in trying to help our economy continue to turn around. So let me address the specifics that you asked about. With respect to new initiatives, yes, we're not only working hard to try to address the 3 FTAs that were negotiated previously, but we have a very ambitious TPP process underway, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is going to give us access to some of the fastest growing markets in Asia that we don't currently have. So we're very focused on that. We're also quite focused on the U.S.-European relationship. You may have seen that I was in Brussels recently to continue the very helpful work that we started under the Transatlantic Economic Council that was also started in a previous administration, but it had not been as active as we thought it could be. So we've been working very hard to make that it's a bilateral partnership, but we're talking really about economic relations among 28 countries, and it is, of course, the most significant economic partnership of any 2 actors in the world today. So we're doing a lot of work with respect to Europe. I mentioned also our efforts to bring Russia into the WTO. It is currently the largest economy outside of the WTO and also outside of the OECD. And the negotiations, while they've been going on for many years, have suddenly in the last year, thanks to the leadership of President Obama and President Medvedev, taken a very serious turn for the better. And both teams, along with the EU, have been working very hard in Geneva and also in capitals to do what we can to help Russia take the final steps that it needs to in order to be able to enter this year. And we have other ideas as well that are that we're busy working on, and we'll be in touch with all of you as they develop further. With respect to Brazil, the ATEC agreement, well, the first goal last year was to get our serious bilateral dispute over the cotton issue to a place where it wasn't going to threaten to derail the entire relationship. And when you're facing almost $1 billion in retaliatory tariffs that could quickly have led to a trade war, we spent a significant amount of time, I myself, but the whole team, working through these issues with then Vice Minister Patriota and his team, and we were able to come to a successful conclusion. It wasn't easy, but both countries saw the wisdom of doing so, and I think it's an agreement that's worked well. It will soon be, there were different pieces of it, but it's roughly a year old, and we look forward to additional intensive work to make sure that this part of our relationship stays on track. The ATEC agreement that we signed when President Obama was down there, it's a very important agreement in terms of taking our relationship to the next level. We are interested in more trade with Brazil, especially as it takes on the World Cup and the Olympics, and they seem to be quite interested in a closer relationship with us as well. Goods, services, a whole range of issues that they're already focused on with respect to these 2 huge opportunities for them, but also opportunities for our exporters and our service providers. They also have significant offshore oil deposits that they're interested in working with us and other partners as well to ensure that they can explore. So it's a very good relationship. I have no doubt it can be better, and we're going to work to get it to that point.
I'm told we actually don't have time for any more questions, so I apologize to the gentleman over here who I'd falsely misled. But Ambassador Sapiro, thank you so much for coming today and giving us the first look.